Welcome to Life Stories, where the most profound tales of love, resilience, and redemption come to life. Today's story takes us into the world of Jessica, a successful woman blinded by ambition, and her journey to rediscover the importance of family and unconditional love. When her son Ethan confronts her neglect of his grandmother Mary, a retired business mogul, their family faces a turning point that will change their lives forever. Can Jessica overcome her pride and rebuild the bonds she once ignored? Join us as we unravel this heartfelt story of forgiveness and second chances. Subscribe now to begin today's journey. Mary Richardson's life had always been a testament to resilience and determination. Born into modest circumstances in a small Midwestern town, she had defied all odds to build a business empire that spanned industries and continents. By the age of 60, she was not just a billionaire but a symbol of triumph, a woman who had fought against societal prejudices and emerged victorious. Her sharp mind, commanding presence, and unyielding spirit made her a respected figure in boardrooms and beyond. Yet, as powerful as Mary was in the public eye, her private life was marked by longing. Her only daughter, Jessica, had grown distant over the years, consumed by her own ambitions. Despite Mary's efforts to bridge the gap, the relationship between mother and daughter remained strained. Jessica, though grateful for the wealth and opportunities her mother's success afforded her, seemed to harbor resentment, a sense of being overshadowed by Mary's towering legacy. On a rainy autumn afternoon, everything changed. Mary, rushing to an important meeting, lost control of her car on a slippery curve. The crash was devastating. The paramedics who arrived at the scene found her unconscious, her body broken in ways that no surgery could fully mend. She had suffered a severe stroke during the accident, leaving her paralyzed and deaf. The vibrant woman who once commanded attention with her voice and vision was now imprisoned in her own body, unable to move or hear the world around her. The news of the accident sent shockwaves through the business community. But for Jessica, it brought a different kind of upheaval. She was called to the hospital to make decisions about her mother's care. Standing in the sterile, impersonal room where Mary lay motionless, Jessica felt an unfamiliar weight pressing down on her. It wasn't grief or concern but resentment, an overwhelming sense of burden. "She'll stay with me," Jessica told the doctors, her voice clipped and businesslike. She signed the necessary paperwork, determined to bring her mother home, though not out of compassion. To Jessica, this was an obligation, one she neither wanted nor felt equipped to handle. When Mary was finally brought to Jessica's luxurious Manhattan apartment, she was placed in a small, dimly lit room at the far end of the hallway. The space was functional but sterile, devoid of warmth or personal touches. Jessica justified the arrangement to herself, claiming it was for her mother's comfort and privacy. But the truth was simpler. Jessica didn't want her presence disrupting the carefully curated life she had built for herself. The first few days were the hardest. Jessica, accustomed to managing high-stakes business deals and dazzling social events, found herself struggling with the mundane reality of caregiving. She arranged for nurses to handle the basic tasks: feeding, bathing, administering medication, but kept her mother at a distance. She visited the room only when absolutely necessary, avoiding eye contact and offering little more than cold pleasantries. Mary, once a woman of immense pride and vitality, now lay silently in her bed, staring out of the narrow window. Her eyes, though still sharp, carried a sadness that words could never convey. The betrayal she felt was compounded by her inability to express it. Her daughter, her pride and joy, had relegated her to the shadows of her life. In the midst of this bleak reality, there was one source of light: Ethan, Jessica's 12-year-old son. Unlike his mother, Ethan saw his grandmother not as a burden but as a person who needed love and attention. He would sneak into Mary's room after school, offering her small tokens of affection: a hand-drawn picture, a book he thought she might like, or simply his presence. At first, Ethan didn't know how to bridge the gap between them. Mary's condition made communication nearly impossible, and her silence felt impenetrable. But Ethan was determined. He began teaching himself sign language, practicing in front of his bedroom mirror late at night. Slowly, haltingly, he started signing simple words to her: hello, love, you. Mary's eyes would light up in recognition. A flicker of the woman she once was. Ethan's efforts brought her a sense of connection she hadn't felt since the accident. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. A quiet rebellion against the indifference that surrounded them. For Jessica, the growing closeness between her son and her mother was barely noticed. She was too preoccupied with her own life, her career, her social standing, her unrelenting pursuit of success. To her, Ethan's time with Mary was a distraction, an innocent child's way of passing time. But for Mary, Ethan's presence was a lifeline. It reminded her that, even in her diminished state, she still had value, still had the capacity to love and be loved. In the silence of her small room, as the world outside carried on without her, Ethan's kindness became her anchor, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And so, amid the shadows of neglect and resentment, a quiet revolution was beginning, one that would soon force Jessica to confront the consequences of her actions and re-examine the meaning of family, sacrifice, and love. Ethan's bond with his grandmother deepened as the weeks turned into months. He was no longer just a curious boy stepping into a world he didn't understand. He was becoming Mary's companion, her advocate, and her source of light in a world that had grown unbearably dim. Every afternoon after school, Ethan would rush home, bypassing the bustling activity of his mother's high-powered life, to slip into Mary's quiet room. The room, despite its plainness, began to take on a different atmosphere when Ethan was there. He brought little touches: a vase with fresh flowers he had picked from a park, colorful drawings taped to the walls, or books he would read aloud. Even though Mary couldn't hear, she could feel his presence. And that made all the difference. One day, while tidying up, Ethan stumbled across a dusty wooden box hidden beneath Mary's bed. Intrigued, he gently pulled it out, careful not to disturb the few belongings his grandmother had left. The box was locked, but nearby, tucked beneath a pile of papers, he found a small brass key. His hands trembled as he opened the lid, unsure of what he might uncover. Inside were old photographs and handwritten letters, each carefully tied with twine. The images told a story that Ethan had never known. There was Mary as a young woman, standing confidently in front of the first office building she had purchased. Another photo showed her holding a young Jessica's hand, her eyes filled with pride as her daughter beamed in her school uniform. The letters, written in Mary's elegant script, detailed her early struggles, the nights she worked late to pay for Jessica's private school tuition, the sacrifices she made to ensure her daughter had every opportunity she never did. Ethan's heart ached as he flipped through the pages. The contrast between the vibrant, ambitious woman in the photos and the silent, forgotten figure now lying in the room was stark. He realized for the first time just how much Mary had endured, not just in building her empire but in raising Jessica. The letters spoke of love, hope, and dreams for the future, dreams that had been shattered by Jessica's indifference. Ethan carefully packed the items back into the box, his mind swirling with thoughts. He felt an overwhelming need to do something, to bridge the gap that had grown between his mother and grandmother. But how could he make Jessica see what he now understood so deeply? The next evening, Ethan sat in his room, practicing sign language in front of the mirror. He had been teaching himself for weeks, and while he still stumbled over some gestures, he was getting better. His grandmother's smile when he signed to her was all the encouragement he needed. As he practiced, Ethan remembered a story Mary had once shared through their simple exchanges. She had told him, with gestures and the help of an old photo, about the first time she bought a car, a symbol of her independence and hard work. It had been a bright red sedan, gleaming under the sun as Mary posed proudly beside it. That memory, shared with such joy despite her current condition, stuck with Ethan. It was a reminder of the life she had fought for, a life Jessica seemed to have forgotten. The next day, Ethan brought the photo to Mary. He pointed to the car, signing clumsily, "Happy." Mary's eyes sparkled as she nodded, her lips curling into a small smile. For a brief moment, the years seemed to fall away, and Ethan saw the powerful woman she once was. Meanwhile, Jessica remained oblivious. Her days were consumed by work, social events, and maintaining the image she had cultivated for years. To her, Mary's condition was an inconvenience, a problem to be managed rather than a relationship to be nurtured. She didn't notice the time Ethan spent with Mary, nor did she care to ask about their growing bond. But the walls Jessica had built around herself were beginning to crack. Even if she didn't realize it yet, Ethan's quiet acts of defiance, his refusal to abandon his grandmother, his determination to bring light into her life, were setting the stage for a confrontation that would force Jessica to reevaluate everything she believed about success, family, and love. For now, Ethan continued his quiet rebellion, driven by the knowledge that his grandmother deserved better. He didn't yet know how he would make his mother see the truth, but he was determined to try. Each small victory, each smile he brought to Mary's face, strengthened his resolve. The journey ahead would not be easy, but Ethan was ready. With every sign he learned and every moment he shared with Mary, he grew more confident that love and empathy could overcome even the deepest of divides. Ethan's defiance grew stronger with each passing day, though it was not the loud, rebellious kind his mother might expect. His was a quiet defiance, a steadfast determination to ensure that his grandmother, Mary, would never feel entirely alone. While Jessica paraded through her life of business meetings, high-end galas, and charity luncheons, Ethan slipped through the cracks of her attention, spending hours by Mary's side. One afternoon, Ethan noticed an object partially hidden behind a bookshelf in Mary's room. Pulling it out, he discovered an old leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age but preserved with care. He hesitated for a moment, glancing at Mary, who was gazing out the window, deciding it was worth the risk. He opened the journal and began reading. The entries transported him to another world, one where Mary was young and determined, fighting her way through life's obstacles. She wrote of the endless nights she spent working to fund her education, the struggles of starting her first business, and the fierce determination that drove her to succeed. There were mentions of Jessica, 2 loving notes about her daughter's early years, her first steps, her first words. One entry stood out to Ethan: "Jessica is my pride and joy. Everything I do for her. I hope she grows up to understand the sacrifices I've made. But more importantly, I hope she learns to value love over ambition." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. His grandmother's unwavering love for Jessica was evident. Yet so was her heartbreak. How could someone who had been given so much care and devotion turn away so easily? Closing the journal, Ethan made a silent vow: he would show his mother the woman Mary truly was, the woman who had given her everything. Meanwhile, Jessica began to notice subtle changes in Ethan's behavior. He was spending less time in the shared spaces of their home and more time in his grandmother's room. Whenever Jessica entered the room unexpectedly, Ethan would quickly gather whatever he was working on and leave, his expression unreadable. One evening, Jessica confronted him in the kitchen. "Ethan," she said, her voice sharp, "you've been spending too much time with your grandmother. She needs rest, not your constant presence." Ethan paused, gripping the edge of the counter. He turned to face her, his eyes steady and filled with something Jessica hadn't expected: defiance. "She doesn't need rest, Mom," he said softly but firmly. "She needs someone to care about her. She's not just a burden. She's your mother." Jessica's mouth tightened into a thin line. I am taking care of her. She has everything she needs. No, she doesn't. Ethan shot back. She needs love, not pity. And she needs you to see her as more than an obligation. Jessica was taken aback. It was the first time Ethan had ever spoken to her this way. For a moment, she felt the faintest flicker of guilt. But she quickly buried it beneath her pride. You don't understand, Ethan, she said dismissively. This is complicated. I have responsibilities. So did she. Ethan replied, his voice rising slightly. But she still found time to love you. Jessica stared at him, her anger bubbling just beneath the surface. She couldn't bring herself to argue further. So she turned on her heel and left the room, leaving Ethan standing there, his fists clenched at his sides. After that night, Ethan knew he had to take his efforts further. Words alone weren't enough to reach his mother. He needed to show her the truth, the sacrifices Mary had made, the love she had poured into Jessica, and the pain she now endured in silence. Over the next few days, Ethan carefully planned his next move. He gathered the photographs, letters, and journal entries he had found in Mary's room and organized them into a timeline of her life. He wanted to create something undeniable, a narrative that would force Jessica to confront her past and see the mother she had abandoned in a new light. Ethan's plan was bold, but he was determined. He would make his mother see the truth, even if it meant risking her anger. For the sake of his grandmother, he couldn't back down. And deep down, he hoped that by showing Jessica the depth of Mary's love, he could begin to heal the wounds that had fractured their family. Ethan's plan took shape as he worked tirelessly in secret. Late at night, after Jessica had gone to bed, he would sit in his room surrounded by photographs, letters, and the journal he had discovered. Carefully, he pieced together Mary's story, the struggles, sacrifices, and triumphs that defined her life. Each piece added a layer to the narrative he hoped would reach his mother's heart. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Jessica had spent years building walls around herself. Walls reinforced by pride, ambition, and the refusal to confront her past. But Ethan believed that if she could see Mary for who she truly was, not just as a bedridden woman but as the fierce, loving mother who had given everything for her, those walls might begin to crumble. The opportunity presented itself sooner than he expected. Jessica announced one evening that she was hosting a gathering for her closest friends and business associates to celebrate a recent deal. The house was to be immaculate, the food catered, and the atmosphere polished to perfection. Ethan saw the gathering as the perfect stage for his confrontation. As the day of the event arrived, Ethan worked quietly, ensuring that his preparations would go unnoticed. He set up a projector in the living room, positioning it discreetly so it could be revealed at just the right moment. He arranged the photos, letters, and journal entries into a slideshow, each image and word carefully chosen to tell Mary's story. He didn't inform Mary of his plan, knowing she would likely disapprove of such a public display. This was his fight, and he was prepared to face the consequences. That evening, as the guests arrived, Jessica was in her element. She moved through the room with ease, her laughter ringing out as she charmed her audience with stories of her success. To her, the gathering was an opportunity to reaffirm her status, to remind everyone of the power and poise she wielded. Ethan watched from the sidelines, waiting for the right moment. When the crowd was fully engaged, Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I have something to share." Jessica turned to him, her smile faltering. "Ethan, this isn't the time. It's important." "Mom," he interrupted, his tone firm. He walked to the projector and pressed a button on the remote. The screen flickered to life, and the room fell silent as the first image appeared, a photograph of Mary in her 20s. Standing proudly in front of her first office. "This is Grandma," Ethan began, his voice strong but tinged with emotion. "She built everything from nothing. She worked day and night to make sure you had a better life. The slideshow progressed, showing images of Mary's achievements, letters detailing her sacrifices, and journal entries filled with love for Jessica. Each slide was a piece of the puzzle, revealing the depth of Mary's devotion and the pain she endured in silence. As the presentation continued, murmurs spread through the room. Jessica stood frozen, her expression shifting from confusion to anger. When the slideshow ended, Ethan turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. "Mom," he said quietly, "Grandma gave you everything. She sacrificed her dreams, her happiness, and her health to make sure you had the life you wanted. And now, when she needs you the most, you've turned away from her." Jessica's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "How dare you?" she hissed, stepping closer to him. "This is not your place. Ethan, you don't understand what I've been through. I understand more than you think." Ethan replied, his voice calm but resolute. "I understand that you've let your pride blind you to the truth. You owe her more than this." The room was silent, the weight of Ethan's words hanging heavy in the air. Jessica's guests exchanged uneasy glances, their admiration for her beginning to waver. The image of Jessica as a poised and successful woman had been shattered, replaced by the reality of her neglect and ingratitude. Jessica turned away, unable to face the stares of her friends or the truth in her son's words. For the first time in years, she felt the walls around her begin to crack, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. But instead of responding, she fled the room, leaving Ethan standing alone before the crowd. Ethan watched her go, his heart heavy but his resolve intact. He had done what he set out to do. Now, it was up to Jessica to confront the truth and decide what kind of person she wanted to be. As the guests quietly left, Ethan returned to Mary's room, seeking comfort in her silent presence. Together, they waited, uncertain of what would come next but hopeful that this moment of truth might be the first step toward healing their fractured family. Jessica locked herself in her bedroom after the confrontation, her mind racing with emotions she couldn't fully process. Anger, shame, and guilt swirled within her, each vying for dominance. The image she had spent years cultivating, a successful, composed, and untouchable woman, had been publicly dismantled by her own son. Ethan's words and the images of her mother's life played over and over in her mind, each one striking a chord she had long ignored. She had always justified her distance from Mary as a necessary consequence of her own ambitions. She told herself that she was simply too busy, that her mother had been strong enough to handle anything. But now, faced with the reality of Mary's sacrifices and the weight of her own neglect, Jessica couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She had failed her mother in the most fundamental way. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Jessica avoided Ethan, unsure of what to say or how to face him. She wandered aimlessly through the rooms, her thoughts heavy with regret. Every corner of the house seemed to remind her of the confrontation, of the judgment in the eyes of her friends and colleagues, and of her mother's silent pain. Finally, she found herself outside Mary's room. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear the faint rustle of pages being turned. Peeking inside, she saw Ethan sitting beside his grandmother's bed, a book open on his lap. He was reading aloud, his voice steady and filled with warmth. Though Mary couldn't hear him, she watched him intently, her eyes soft with gratitude. Jessica hesitated, her hand resting on the doorframe. She felt like an intruder in a world she didn't belong to, a world she had chosen to ignore. For the first time, she saw the bond between Ethan and Mary not as an inconvenience but as something deeply beautiful, a connection forged in love and empathy. She stepped into the room, her presence immediately noticed by Ethan, who stopped reading mid-sentence. "Mom," he said, his voice cautious. "What are you doing here?" Jessica hesitated, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. I wanted to check on her," she said, her eyes avoiding his. She looked at Mary, who regarded her with a calm, unreadable expression. Jessica felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly took her breath away. Ethan closed the book and stood up. "I'll leave you two alone," he said, his tone neutral but edged with disappointment. As he left the room, he cast one last glance at Jessica. His eyes filled with a mixture of hope and frustration. Jessica sat down in the chair Ethan had vacated, suddenly unsure of what to do or say. Mary lay still, her gaze fixed on the window. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words. Jessica swallowed hard, her voice faltering as she finally spoke. "Mom," she began, her hands trembling in her lap. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but they were all she could manage. "I've been so caught up in my own life, my own everything, that I didn't see how much I was hurting you." Mary turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting Jessica's. There was no anger in her expression, only a deep sadness and a glimmer of something that looked like understanding. Jessica continued, her voice breaking. "I was wrong," she admitted. "I've been selfish. And I've taken you for granted. I don't know how to make it right. But I want to try. Please. Let me try." Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes as she spoke. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight of her emotions. Mary didn't respond, but her hand moved slightly, reaching for Jessica's. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Jessica took her mother's hand in hers, holding it tightly as tears streamed down her face. In that moment, she felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crumble completely. The woman she had tried to forget was still there, still waiting for her, still willing to forgive. And for the first time, Jessica realized that love was not about perfection or control but about showing up. Even when it was hard. The room grew quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. It was no longer filled with pain and regret but with the possibility of healing. Jessica didn't know if she could ever fully make amends. But she knew one thing: she was willing to spend the rest of her life trying. The days following Jessica's heartfelt apology marked the beginning of a slow but meaningful transformation. For the first time in years, she began to prioritize something other than her career and social status, her family. The journey was not without its challenges, but every small step brought her closer to rebuilding the bond she had neglected for so long. Jessica started by spending more time with Mary, sitting by her bedside and simply being present. At first, the moments were awkward, filled with silence that Jessica struggled to fill. But as time went on, she found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told Mary about her work, her fears, and her regrets. Though Mary couldn't respond verbally, her eyes conveyed an understanding that gave Jessica the courage to keep going. Ethan, who had been wary of his mother's intentions, watched these interactions from a distance. He noticed the effort Jessica was putting in. The way she lingered in Mary's room long after her visits had once been perfunctory. Slowly, his skepticism began to wane, replaced by a cautious optimism. He joined them one afternoon, pulling up a chair and engaging in the quiet, unspoken companionship that had become the cornerstone of their time together. Jessica also began to reflect on the life she had built. She realized that her relentless pursuit of success had come at a great cost, not only to her relationship with her mother but to her own sense of self. For years, she had measured her worth by her achievements, ignoring the emotional connections that truly mattered. With Mary's silent support and Ethan's gentle nudges, Jessica began to reevaluate her priorities. One evening, Jessica decided to do something she hadn't done in years. She retrieved the family albums Ethan had discovered and brought them to Mary's room. Sitting beside her mother, she opened the first album and began flipping through the pages. The photographs, once tucked away and forgotten, now served as a bridge between the past and the present. "Do you remember this, Mom?" Jessica asked, pointing to a picture of a younger Mary standing in front of her first office building. Mary's eyes lit up, and a faint smile crossed her lips. Jessica laughed softly. the sound tinged with nostalgia. "You were so proud that day. I remember you taking me to the office and letting me sit in your chair. You told me that one day I could have a desk like yours." As they went through the albums, Jessica's memories of her childhood came flooding back, the late nights Mary spent working, the sacrifices she made to ensure Jessica had the best opportunities, and the quiet moments of encouragement that had shaped her into the person she had become. For the first time, Jessica truly understood the depth of her mother's love and dedication. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to play a vital role in bringing his family closer together. He encouraged Jessica to spend time with Mary not out of obligation but out of genuine care. "Grandma doesn't need grand gestures," he told her one day. "She just needs you to be there. That's enough." Jessica took his advice to heart. She began to include Mary in the small rituals of daily life, wheeling her into the living room during family meals and ensuring she was part of their conversations. Though Mary couldn't contribute in the traditional sense, her presence brought a warmth to their home that had been missing for far too long. As Jessica grew closer to Mary, she also made an effort to mend her relationship with Ethan. She realized how much she had underestimated him, how his quiet strength and unwavering loyalty had been the glue holding their fractured family together. One evening, she sat him down and thanked him for his courage and determination. "You showed me what I was too blind to see," Jessica said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan. And I'm sorry for the way I've been. I promise I'll do better." Ethan smiled, the tension between them easing for the first time in months. "You're already doing better, Mom," he replied. "Grandma sees it. And so do I." Over time, the house transformed from a place of cold indifference to one filled with love and connection. Jessica learned to embrace vulnerability, letting go of the facade she had clung to for so long. Mary, though still limited by her physical condition, radiated a quiet joy that came from knowing her family was finally healing. The changes weren't instantaneous, nor were they perfect. There were moments of frustration and setbacks, but the commitment to rebuild their relationships remained steadfast. Jessica's journey toward redemption was just beginning. But with Ethan and Mary by her side, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't known in years. In those quiet moments, as the three of them sat together in Mary's room, Jessica realized that true success wasn't measured by wealth or accolades but by the love and bonds they shared. And for the first time, she felt like she was truly living. In the end, Jessica's journey of redemption transformed her life and her family. What began as a painful confrontation turned into a path of healing, love, and understanding. With Ethan's unwavering courage and Mary's silent strength, Jessica learned that true success is found in the bonds we build and nurture, not in wealth or status. Mary, though unable to speak, became the heart of their home, her presence reminding them daily of the power of sacrifice and unconditional love. Ethan's determination to fight for what was right became the cornerstone of a stronger, more united family. Jessica now faces the future with hope and humility, ready to honor the legacy of the woman who gave her everything. Life is about second chances, and this family found theirs. Subscribe to Life Stories for more heartfelt tales like this, where love and resilience light the way to a brighter tomorrow.